Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, October 27th, 2015, getting through the week here, heading to the end of the month. And we have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, hand hovering over that telephone, ready to swoop on down and put you on the air with your comments and questions. Just as we went to air, there's a breaking story coming over Fox News. House Committee is introducing a resolution to impeach the head of the Internal Revenue Service for lying under oath. So that scandal has not gone away, despite the Department of Injustice giving Lois Lerner a get-out-of-jail-free card. And it shouldn't go away. It absolutely should not go away. Using the IRS as a weapon against your opponents was an article of impeachment against Richard Nixon, and it should still be an article of impeachment now. Now, turning to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, Obama is weighing, meaning he's already decided, to move U.S. ground troops closer to the front lines in Syria. And they're calling them advisors. We're going to move the advisors closer to combat. Well, if you're my age and remember Vietnam, that's how we got scammed back then. Oh, no, we're not putting American soldiers in harm's way. They're just there to train, to advise. And, of course, it turned out they were there in combat, and they were getting killed, and they're trying the same scam here. And they're risking, by doing so, they're risking direct combat with Russian assets. We know Spetsnaz are on the ground. Russia is dominating the skies over Syria. This is tailor-made to set off a war between the U.S. and Russia, which the U.S. seems to want and Russia does not. And it should be remembered, the United States has no legal right to be in Syria. The government of Syria has not invited the United States into its country to deal with the terrorist groups, which we now know are all working for the United States. The United Nations has not passed a resolution authorizing a U.S. military intervention. Congress has not declared war. The U.S. is clearly the aggressor in this situation, and we ought not to lose sight of that. Now then, over at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Ash Carter is saying that he expects U.S. troops to engage in more combat operations in Iraq against ISIS, even at the risk of American deaths. Carter says, I'm absolutely prepared to do that. Okay, Ash, here's your rifle, and here's your parachute. You know, Ash reminds me of the movie Shrek, where there's Prince Farquhar, and he's getting ready to send his soldiers off to defeat the dragon, and he's up there saying, now some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am prepared to make. That's exactly what it is. It's easy for Ash Carter or any of these other people in Washington, D.C., to make grandiose gestures with other people's children. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're going to send more of our children to be killed and crippled to prop up what is clearly a failing foreign policy agenda in the Middle East. And I'm not the only one saying that. Over at Zero Hedge, article, Washington-Syria Strategy in Complete Disarray, as our ally, supposedly Turkey, is now bombing the U.S. armed rebels, the Syrian Kurds. So nobody really, there isn't a clear line, you know, our side, their side. The U.S. is supporting the Kurds in Syria. Turkey, which is supposedly on our side, is now bombing those Kurds. So this whole thing is just decaying into utter chaos. Just utter chaos. Article coming out of Global Research up in Canada. The U.S. is making a fool of itself in Syria. Could not agree more. The U.S. is trying to raise on a busted flush. They're trying to regain the propaganda initiative. They're trying to mischaracterize what Russia is doing in Syria and somehow make it look like the U.S. has a right to go on in and protect those terrorists who we used to be told were the bad guys, and now Washington, D.C. said, well, yeah, okay, yeah, they're terrorists, but there are terrorists. And basically what the U.S. government has been forced to do is admit they are a state sponsor of terror. And I always thought that was supposed to be a bad thing. Certainly it's a bad thing when they claim that Iran is a state sponsor of terror without any hard proof. And here we have the United States government openly admitting, yes, we are a state sponsor of terror, but our terrorists are good terrorists and their terrorists are bad terrorists. It's getting very childish over there in Washington, D.C. Other articles like this with a YouTube video. Turkish army strikes Kurdish forces in Syria for the first time. So this is turning into a three-way fight. Nobody's sure who's shooting at who anymore. Now, over at Common Dreams, they have another story saying that more and more evidence continues to surface that the United States military knew they were bombing an active hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, while they were doing it. I mean, the U.S. government has changed their story 4 times now to sort of get away from this. But the evidence is, yes, the U.S. government knew it was a hospital, knew it was active, and decided to destroy it. They didn't just destroy it, they hammered it. And then they sent a tank in to roll over the wreckage to destroy any evidence of what was going on. But if you saw the photos of the interior of that hospital, they shredded the place with that AC-130. Now, Doctors Without Borders is out there saying this constitutes a war crime. And they are absolutely right. Hospitals are supposed to be sacrosanct. And now, adding fuel to the fire, the United States proxy in Yemen has just bombed another Doctors Without Borders hospital. Once, maybe we can think it's a mistake. Twice, no. That's policy. That's policy. Now, the U.S. is trying to level the playing field on this by claiming that Russia has bombed Syrian hospitals. And over at Land Destroyer Blogspot up in Canada, they're describing it as the incredible expanding lie. Because all of this claim that Russia bombed a Syrian field hospital came out of a single source, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Now, as we've mentioned before, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is actually just one guy, Rami Abdel Rahman, who lives in Great Britain, has not been in Syria in 15 years, and has been seen coordinating his activities with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London. The guy's a phony, and yet everybody took this story from the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, and they ran with it saying, oh, those horrible, horrible Russians. Well, Russian Defense Ministry has called their bluff and said, okay, where's your proof that we did this? I know you've got this guy living in London saying we did it. That's an assertion. Back it up. Show us your proof. And I'm sure the response is going to be, we can't show you our proof. It'll reveal our methods and expose our sources to extreme danger. You just have to take our word for it. Which is kind of an arrogant comment coming from the government that told us all Saddam had nuclear weapons. Now, up in Ukraine, the Donetsk airport has been shelled for 4 hours. It's very obvious that Kiev is completely abandoned the Minsk agreements. And apparently they're using 120 millimeter artillery. That is serious, serious city-wrecking stuff. Now, over in Libya, one of their helicopters from Tripoli's self-styled government was shot down. 12 have been killed. And it was carrying, apparently, top military commanders as well. So there's a victory for the Yemen people. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're getting a report that at least 20 Turkish aircraft have violated Greek airspace. And it's being reported over in the Greek publication Kaahumanu and picked up by Pravda. Everybody's wondering, what the heck is Turkey doing over Greece with warplanes without permission? Bomb them into accepting austerity or haircuts on their savings accounts? Not really sure here. Meanwhile, down in the Golan, Russian fighter jets are now hitting militant positions on the Golan Heights near Israel's border, taking away Israel's excuse to invade and seize that land for themselves. Israel's claim over the Golan and its vast oil resources is not recognized internationally, not even by the United States of America, and Putin has just yanked the rug out of Israel's excuse to go on in and take the place over. Game, set, and match, Vladimir Putin. We're going to grab ourselves some phone calls here. Ronnie in Nevada, aloha. I hope you're upwind of that nuclear waste disposal site fire, but what's on your mind today?
I am. I'm in Utah right now driving truck, but anyway, I just wanted to say thanks for taking my call. My concern is, if Russia's got the warplanes going into Syria and we're going to get our troops in Iraq going there, and next thing you know, the Russians are going to be playing for something, and man, our drunken Speaker of the House, what's his name, Boehner? He's going to have to call Netanyahu. What do you think's going on over there right now? Can't stand it. Don't you know I'm about ready to resign? Geez, I can't stand that.
Could very well be, but
it goes on and on and on.
If you study the history of Pearl Harbor and the fact that it was most assuredly not a surprise, Roosevelt spent all of 1941 goading Japan into the attack, following an 8-step plan developed by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. And Roosevelt literally set those ships, those old junker ships, and all the men on them up to be a blood sacrifice to get his war. All the newer ships were well out to sea, out of range of the Japanese striking force. What was left behind were actually very old ships that were at the end of their lifespan. In fact, the Arizona's sister ship, the Utah, which was sunk on the other side of Ford Island, had already been taken off combat status and was being used to train gunnery crews on. So these were ships that were ready to go to the scrapyard anyway.
Oh yeah, and that's what you can even get on the internet. You can get all that correct history. I've read it off of the different sites. You go to the Library of Congress, you get all that stuff.
Yes, you can. Most of it was declassified in 1994, and there was a Navy commander wrote a book, Day of Deceit, by Commander Robert B. Stinnett, and it's a very valuable book on the truth behind Pearl Harbor because Stinnett agrees with what Roosevelt did. So he doesn't go into this book with an axe to grind and saying, oh, he lied to the American people. Stinnett actually agrees Roosevelt needed to lie to the people to get us into the war against Nazi Germany. And so he doesn't have a bias telling the story. He's just laying out all the facts of how Pearl Harbor actually happened.
Yeah, and it's not just that, but you can't believe anything that this U.S. government tries all propaganda. And if anybody ought to be on the watch terrorist list, it probably ought to be our own country right now.
The U.S. government has just admitted it is a state sponsor of terror because it was arming, supplying, and funding the terror groups operating in Syria right now. The United States is a state sponsor of terror. Everybody get used to that idea.
Yeah, and not only that, but if you listen to John Boehner and this 2-year budget deal, this stuff is just the same garbage that they've had for the last 100 years. Raise the debt limit. It's not self-sustaining anyway. If you add in the unfunded mandates, we're at what, $250 trillion.
Little clarification here. Okay, the new budget deal is not raising the debt limit, it is discarding it entirely. That's the new deal.
Okay, so there won't be any limit on it at all, then.
That's true. They can borrow and spend until, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are permanent slaves to that debt.
Yeah, and you'll never see the Federal Reserve raise interest rates because the whole thing will come collapsing down, and they've got to have the money junkies give these politicians their lovely little campaign and reward checks and everything else. But you listen to them, oh, gee, I'm so pure, at heart? Don't you just love me? You don't smell no skunk gas on me, do you?
Yeah. Listen, Ronnie, I need to let you go. We got another caller waiting I want to get to before the
thanks. I
break.
appreciate you.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to DJ in Georgia. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. Just to segue into that, this whole terrorism for profit industry that's been coming up, and I've noticed recently how much money the terrorists, the ISIL is able to generate just from the drug selling.
Mm-hmm.
They said it's over $500 billion in drugs that they're funneling through Europe, and between that and the oil that they're selling, I've kind of got this thing. It's not a suspicion any longer, but it feels like wouldn't that be the perfect reason for the U.S. to have a terrorist organization / army working for them? Because if you think about it, you have an army now that can generate its own revenue. You don't need U.S. troops anymore.
Well, yeah, because the United States government doesn't want the American people learning that the U.S. government is itself one of the largest drug cartels on the planet. And that's where all these terrorists, by the way, are getting their opium is shipped down from Afghanistan, which the poppies have been blooming ever since the U.S. took the place over again.
Well, yeah, and that's the fact is, like you said, they just recently had a drug bust where, that's what half of the time the ISIS and this ISIL is doing is forget about fighting. They're fundraising times to help, stock up for another war. So they're out there selling drugs most of the time. Half of them, that's what they're doing. They're out there generating money for the cartel and for their masters. And they're under, you just had a story earlier about the general, an Israeli general that's coordinating with them. And the thing people have to realize is, ISIS and ISIL, the U.S. is not the only one backing them. You have Israel with the Mossad doing the intelligence for them.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Qatar and Saudi Arabia doing the fund transfers, or actually, I should say money laundering, because they're generating the cash.
Well, don't forget that the Saudi prince just got arrested because his luxury private jet was found loaded with drugs. DJ, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about Israel for a little bit, which means we're probably going to get another hacker attack on our server, because nothing says that the facts are not on somebody's side than trying to silence the other side. Let's face it. If you have a position and the truth is on your side, you are not afraid of a debate. You will get out there, you will present your evidence, the other side presents their evidence, and everybody gets to make up their mind. When you see a group that tries to scare people away from asking questions, avoids a debate by screaming anti-Semitism, as that former member of the Knesset admitted to on Democracy Now!, when they try and use the force of law to get you to believe as you're ordered to believe, it's a flashing neon sign. What you're being sold is a big steaming pile of bovine excrement. And that's what it means whenever they're attacking my server or anybody else's server. It's a confession. Yeah, you caught us in a lie. We're going to try and shut you up. That's basically what they're saying. Now, getting on to this story, Netanyahu, I don't want a binational state, but we need to control all the territories for the foreseeable future. And apparently the gist of this article is that Netanyahu was addressing some of the opposition members of the Knesset and said, I'm asked if we will forever live by the sword. Yes. Netanyahu does not want peace. And not too surprisingly, it's being reported over at RINF.com. Israel intensifies genocide of the Palestinian citizens. And they're talking about the current building boom, where Israel continues to build illegal settlements on Palestinian land. Israel is confiscating Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem and turning them over to Israelis. It doesn't get more obvious than that. There's been another tragic execution of a schoolgirl, 17-year-old, by Israeli soldiers. And once again, this one was caught on video, and the girl wasn't doing anything. They just gunned her down. It's open season. Now, here's an article over at The Intercept, no less. Criminalization of anti-Israel activism escalates, this time in the land of the Charlie Hebdo free speech march. This is Glenn Greenwald, and he's out there just pointing out the incredible hypocrisy for France to have had this huge thing about Charlie Hebdo and free speech, and Charlie Hebdo has a right to publish very insulting cartoons about Muslims, insulting cartoons about the Pope, insulting cartoons about Christians. That's freedom of speech. And yet, their French court just upheld huge punishments for people who were criticizing Israel and supporting the boycott movement. It's a double standard. Now, not too long ago, we had Arthur Topham on this show, and his trial in Canada has started. The way it's termed over at Henry Makov's website, organized Jewry tries to silence an old hippie. And again, they're trying to use this law that's in Canada that equates criticism of Israel with hate speech and anti-Semitism. Now, we are hearing that new Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau is going to be going through that C-51 bill and basically try and restore free speech to Canada. Because the Charter of Canada says, yeah, you have a right to your opinion. You can think what you want. You can say what you want. There is no Israel or Palestinian exception to free speech in Canada. Or there shouldn't be. And, of course, this whole trial of Topham was being driven forward by B'nai B'rith Canada. They're hitting the panic button, especially after Netanyahu's goof, trying to blame the Palestinians for the Holocaust, which makes Netanyahu a Holocaust revisionist, which means if he ever goes to Canada, he could be arrested. And it taught the world a lesson that we will never forget. Most of us already knew this. Israel lies about the Holocaust for political gain. Israel lies about the Holocaust for political gain. Israel lies about the Holocaust for political gain. That's why Netanyahu did that. And they're all in a panic because such an overt, obvious falsehood has opened the door to people saying, I think I need to find out more about this for myself and not rely on corporate media, which has a bias, and government, which clearly has a bias. Now, if I were the judge in Arthur Topham's case, knowing that the law he's being prosecuted under may vanish in the coming weeks, I might just say there's no point in going forward. Unfortunately, under the pressure from B'nai B'rith, they're going to try and fry this guy as an example. Israel's literally resorting to terror tactics to try and maintain their propaganda myth a little while longer. Now, there's another article over from the Electronic Intifada where outlawing the boycott of Israel in Europe is apparently a key goal of America's AIPAC. And apparently, there are provisions in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that are protecting Israel's interests. They want to wire into the treaty that you cannot boycott Israel. No matter what it does, no matter how badly they behave. Now, boycotts are a recognized form of nonviolent protest. Gandhi used them to tremendous effect, freeing India from foreign puppet rule. So at least here in the United States, boycotts are protected speech under the First Amendment. But Israel's attitude is you can have all the free speech you want, just not about us. We're above the law. We're above free speech. We're sacrosanct. We're God's chosen. You can't talk bad things about it. We can do whatever we want, and you can't say anything about it. It's basically the attitude coming out of Israel's government. And they are hitting the panic button after that situation with Netanyahu's, the Palestinians are to blame for the Holocaust. Story coming out of Russia today. 20,000 Israelis have filed a lawsuit against Facebook for allowing posts by Palestinians who are reacting to the Israel provocations, all the shootings. I mean, if you look at the actual body count, it's very one-sided. Thousands of Palestinians have been wounded. Hundreds killed. Nowhere near that many. By the way, there's a website out there you should take a look at, If Americans Only Knew. And it basically has the hard numbers and facts about what's been going on in Israel and Palestine. So the Israelis are going to take Facebook into court and make the judges force Facebook to censor anything that might support Palestine. Because Israel doesn't believe in freedom of speech. Because they have way too much to hide. Over in Casablanca, Morocco, they've had a huge anti-Israel rally, protesting Israel's aggressions against the Palestinians. So I guess they've got more freedom of speech in Morocco than we have here in the United States or Canada or France or Great Britain. 343 British academics have signed a letter vowing to boycott Israeli universities. And of course, Israel's supporters in Great Britain are out there saying, you can't do that! You can't do that! You're not allowed to be upset with us. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, this weekend is Halloween, and Claire and I are looking forward to it. Our neighborhood locally has gone through this amazing transformation. 2.5 years ago, I mean, we've had all this drug crime going on literally in both our neighboring units, and one of them got arrested, the other one passed away, and we've got these wonderful new families with kids. And not just our neighboring units. It's like we moved to a better neighborhood and we didn't even have to pack. So we've got our little healthy veggie snack things all set to hand out there, and not too surprisingly, everybody's getting ready to get costumes. We got to get our costumes for Halloween. Well, Walmart, which is showing less and less sense of late, decided they were going to have, among their selection of costumes for children, an Israeli soldier costume, an IDF costume, which I'm sure was very pleasing to their Jewish customers, which you kind of wonder how many of them actually shop at Walmart. But it has provoked outrage among everybody else, given the reputation of the IDF around the world right now. And it shows a tremendous lack of sensitivity. And I don't know if Walmart is going to pull that off the rack, or they're just going to say, yeah, it's there, you know, if you don't dress your kid like IDF, you're an anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Now, turning over to China, as you know, the United States deliberately sent an Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyer, the USS Lassen, inside the 12-mile territorial limit around Zubi Reef without the permission of the Chinese government. This is clearly a provocation. This is Obama standing up there and saying, I dare you to knock the stick off my shoulder. And China didn't, but China is upset diplomatically. They've summoned the U.S. ambassador to say, what the heck is going on here? And to say, we reject this idea that you have, that you can just go wherever you want on this planet without regard to the rules. The whole world is getting sick and tired of the U.S. attitude of we can stick our nose into anybody's business we feel like because we're exceptional. Which I guess is the 21st century version of we're the master race, when you come right down to it. So China is very, very upset. The U.S. has thumped its chest and said, see, we could send our warship next to you whenever we feel like it. And I think it would have been a giggle if China had flown one of their electronic warfare aircraft over the Lassen and paralyzed it, the way the Russians did with the Donald Cook. That would have been very, very interesting. But right now, the attitude coming out of the Global Times is, all right, you've had your little demonstration, now it's time for the U.S. destroyer to get out of the area. It's just a U.S. political show. It's theater. so the U.S. can stand up there and say, we are mighty and we will go where we want. Now, over at the United Nations, as you know, the United States has started normalizing relations with Cuba. Still can't get Cuban cigars and rum in the stores, but that'll come, I'm sure. And this was done to forestall a renewed Russian presence in Cuba as we head, obviously, into this confrontation the U.S. is desiring to get. Over at the United Nations, they had a vote regarding the U.S. blockade of Cuba, which is still technically in effect, and it was overwhelming that the U.S. blockade of Cuba needs to end. In fact, the only people who voted against this revolution was the United States and Israel. Now let's turn to the economy, because there's a very alarming revelation over at the Washington Times, where apparently the White House and negotiators from the Congress have reached the outlines of a new budget deal. And they're not raising the debt limit. They're suspending the debt limit. It's poof, it's gone. There will be no more limit on government borrowing. And that means your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be enslaved to that debt. And again, the question you as Americans should be asking is why, when the Constitution authorizes the U.S. government to create and issue its own debt-free currency, does our government persist in borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned central bank and sticking you, the American people, with that debt to make those private central bankers rich, all for the cost of ink and paper or numbers in a computer? And we're not the only country that's waking up to that scam. That Comer lawsuit up in Canada is still moving forward. Canada is pulling out all the stops to try and keep the Canadian people in general from finding out about this. They're blocking websites from outside Canada that are reporting on this. The Canadian government under Harper ordered the Canadian media not to report the story, because Canada's central bank is supposed to provide interest-free loans for government projects. And Harper's government and the government before that instead borrow all that money at interest from private bankers and stick the Canadian people with that debt. It's estimated that since the 1970s, the Canadian taxpayer has been socked for over $1 trillion that was taken out of their pocket, for which they got absolutely nothing in return, because it all went into the pockets of those bankers. And the Comer lawsuit so far has passed every legal challenge. Harper might have done something dramatic. I don't think Trudeau is going to stop this. Those Canadian people got cheated by their government and their banks. So did the American people. And it's time for refunds. You want to revive the economy in both of these countries? Let's just take back all that money we were cheated out of, put it back in the pockets of the people. They'll be down there at the malls buying new American-made products. They'll be up to date on their credit card bills and their mortgages and their rents. They'll be buying American-made cars or Canadian-made cars, as the case may be. And the economy will be on the road to recovery. But as long as we have this system where the money is forced out of our pockets and into the pockets of the private central bankers, it has to crash sooner or later. Now, so far, Boehner and Obama spending deals have increased the national debt by $3 trillion, $970 billion, which comes out to $33,800 per American household. That's over and above the debt you already owed before all this deal-making took place. In other words, right now, Boehner and Obama have added more debt to the American household than 51% of our population can earn in an entire year. That's how out of control it is. Let's see now. U.S. services economy tumbles to weakest since last January, which they're still trying to blame on the horrible winter that we went through, except that it really wasn't that horrible a winter because we all know there's global warming, and everybody who was seeing the snow and ice, they were just imagining that. So, let's see. Word out of Detroit that their public school system could be completely insolvent by next spring. They've run out of money. The whole country's running out of money because the money has been siphoned out of our country, out of our people, and given to Wall Street, given to the war machine, given to Israel. Put in the pockets of various corrupt people. Now, Russia and China continue to increase their gold holdings. The central banks are continuing their loose monetary policies because if they actually started trying to comply with any kind of sensible rules, the whole thing would come apart. The only thing keeping the economy going is everybody's out there printing new money and typing numbers into the computer and just pretending that it's all a working economy, but it isn't. Wall Street doing wonderful is not a good national economy. The nation doing wonderful is a good national economy. Got to take a break for the news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the economy, and there's a very alarming development being reported over at goldcore.com. And that has to do with the European Union government in Brussels is now taking their member states to court for refusing to pass bail-in laws to allow the bankers to help themselves to savings accounts. And more, I think, between this and the push on the GMOs, the member states of the European Union are realizing that they have lost more of their sovereignty than they were originally told was going to be the case. It was supposed to be this loose federation, just like the original United States. And Brussels is turning into a tyrannical central federal government. And Brussels is already trying to change the law that allowed member nations of the European Union to opt out of GMO, because they didn't think anybody was actually going to do it. And now they're literally taking these countries to court to say, you will pass laws that let bankers help themselves to your citizens' money. I don't care if there's a law. This is robbery. I don't care how many justifications or euphemisms or redefinition, oh, you're not a savings account holder, you're an unsecured investor in the bank. You should take your money out of the bank. And, of course, that's why they've got now this push for a cashless society so that you have to put your money in somebody's bank somewhere where it's wide open for the bankers and the governments to help themselves to whenever they feel like it. They're removing your choice to do with your money as you will. Of course, their attitude is, it's not your money anyway. We loaned it to you at interest. It's still technically ours. That's their attitude. That's how they view the public currency. Now, over in Wisconsin, Republicans are fast-tracking a bill to undermine workers' compensation. Now, workers' compensation began out of the same kind of an agenda that we saw the vaccine injury court. When people are injured by vaccines, the vaccine companies aren't forced to pay for it. The taxpayers pay for it. Same thing with workers' comp. If a worker gets injured at work, even if the injury is clearly the employer's fault, the employer cannot be sued. The taxpayers pick up the cost. Now, these Republicans are trying to undermine that, where if you get injured at work, well, your Obamacare policies will take care of you. That's what that's there for. Turning to the world of politics, Jeb Bush is clearly in trouble. He is now turning to his brother, George W., for help in his 2016 campaign. Now, when Jeb Bush originally launched his campaign, he was trying to keep himself distant from the legacy of George Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush, perceiving correctly that that's not entirely a positive image in the minds of America. But Jeb Bush's campaign is in such serious trouble. Now he wants George W. Bush to come on board and help him out, much as the way Hillary has been bringing Bill Clinton to stump for her. And I don't think it's going to work out as well as Jeb is hoping because of the baggage George W. Bush carries, including all of these wars we're mired in. Now, Judge Napolitano, in an interview over at WorldNet Daily, is saying that Hillary's testimony before the Benghazi Committee is not as squeaky clean as Hillary and her supporters would have you think. Hillary was playing to the committee, and Hillary was secondarily playing to the American audience that was watching the hearings. And where Judge Napolitano says Hillary's in trouble is her insistence that she knew absolutely nothing about the gun running going on through the consulate in Benghazi. She denied under oath that she knew anything about a program to supply arms to the rebels, and apparently this is contradicted by some of the emails that have surfaced. So she was lying about that, just as she and Obama were lying about the attack on the consulate was a spontaneous mob because of this YouTube video. They lied, they lied, they lied, they lied. And the fine details don't matter anymore. It is time for all of Americans to really face up to the decision. Are we willing to live under a government that lies to us about everything? My answer, of course, is no. I'll have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. Now, I'm going to have to give a little tip of the hat to Geraldo Rivera. I've not always been kind on him, but apparently back in 2013, he called it correctly, because in an article over on The Blaze, Geraldo Rivera said his sources were telling him that Benghazi was about running missiles to the Syrian rebels. It is now beyond question that the U.S. government, while they were telling us that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were evil people, our enemies in the war on terror, that the U.S. government was giving weapons and supplies to them. And by the way, there's another video on the front page of What Really Happened showing another botched airdrop of clearly American-provided military supplies and ammunitions. It was dropped into an area controlled by ISIS. Bad news for the U.S. ISIS had left. They skedaddled before the aircraft got there. Now, Hillary is out there speechifying, and she's made a comment that I think everybody needs to pay attention to. Hillary has said that she will go way beyond Obama on the issue of allowing illegal immigration into this country. Because illegal immigrants are good for Democratic votes, even though they're not legally supposed to vote. Can you see how overt this takeover of our country is? Illegal aliens are not allowed to vote in our elections. And yet every time any state wants to put up some kind of a system to check the identity and validity of a person who is voting, it's denounced as racist and discriminatory, and we just have to let everybody vote. That's not the way the country is supposed to run. And the reason it was set up that way by the Founding Fathers was specifically to prevent a huge influx of people from another country coming on in and voting themselves ownership of our country. Another article coming on out about the Benghazi hearing, basically saying Hillary's body language, when it was all over, where she's up there and her arms are up and she's cheering, she evaded the consequences of her actions, she defeated the evil right-wing conspiracy. And it really made a bad impression because the subject of the hearing really wasn't Hillary. It was about how these 4 guys got killed at the consulate, allegations of gun running, the fact that the U.S. government lied to you all about the video being the cause of it, and Hillary's dancing around like she's won a sporting event, and it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Now, Donald Trump is out there complaining that he is not getting fair treatment from the U.S. media, which we knew was going to be the case. He's being Ron Paul'd. And so he is now taking to posting photos of his own political meetings on his website and on Twitter because he's getting these huge crowds to show up, just like Ron Paul did. And just like in Ron Paul, corporate media won't show the pictures of the crowds he's drawing. And going back to 2012, we can expect really sloppy photoshopping to try and make the crowds for Carson and Sanders and Hillary and everybody look bigger than they really are. Some of those Mitt Romney crowd photos, the photoshopping was so bad. If they'd been a student in my class at UH, I would have flunked them. Actually, I would have kicked them out, now that I think about it here. All righty, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and start with a phone call from Robert in Louisiana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going, Michael? I've been listening to you for a while now. Couple of questions, because in the beginning when I first started getting into the consciousness, getting conscious, I was very reluctant to believe a lot of things, but after listening to you and a lot of other people, I've come to understand. First question I would like to ask is, what kind of credibility do you give to the Benghazi situation actually being a failed kidnapping attempt? Because when I think about it, I mean, that's the only thing that I could see. And also, one more question. What is your take on I guess you could say, the situation of those people who are claiming to be Jews over in Israel actually being from Khazar? Could you shed a little light on that for me?
Okay, well, let's talk about the first one. When Benghazi first happened, and we didn't know about the CIA torture dungeon in the building, we didn't know about the gun running, my first assumption was that it was a staged terror attack to allow Obama to look good and dominate the media at a time when he was struggling with Mitt Romney in the polls. However, with the advent of all this new information coming out, I've kind of moved away from that theory. And again, when you look at how the government takes advantage of every single terror attack to fan the flames of war, the fact that they tried to cover this one up by saying it was a spontaneous riot over the video tells us that they were hiding something. They didn't want people asking why the terrorists targeted this building at this particular time, because that would have led to revelations about the CIA torture room and the gun running, but it all came out anyway. So I don't think the kidnapping story is really valid. Maybe this terrorist group, which does have ties, unfortunately, to U.S. intelligence, I'm not sure we'll ever know exactly what was going on. There could have even been a faction fight within U.S. intelligence agencies by people who were just upset over the fact that Obama and Clinton were sending guns to the people that we're supposed to be at war with. And could have been something like that. Now, with regard to the occupants of Israel, the vast majority of them are a subgroup of Jews called the Ashkenazi. They are the most populous group of Jews in the world, but amazingly enough, they are not, in fact, descended from the biblical Hebrews. I mean, their lily-white skin kind of gives it away. And a guy named Arthur Koestler wrote a book called The 13th Tribe, in which he documented that what happened is back about 800 AD, there was a country, Khazaria, which is where Soviet Georgia, Russian Georgia is now, and they were merchants. They wanted to do a lot of business, and they had the Christians to the north and the Muslims to the south, and in order to trade with both, the king of Khazaria declared Judaism the state religion, and they imported some rabbis, and they started teaching everybody, you are now all Jewish. And it kind of lasted for almost 100 years. It succeeded in keeping Christian and Muslim proselytizers out of their country, but they went on making a huge amount of money with trade. But eventually Khazaria fell, and these descendants of the converted Khazars, after 3 generations, absolutely convinced that they're hereditary Jews, moved northward into Russia and westward into Europe. That's where the European and Russian Jews originated, and now those are the people that have gone back to Israel saying, this is our land, God gave it to us. And the genetics, though, clearly show that they're Central Asian. They're not Middle Eastern or Hebrew. And again, look at the skin tone.
Yeah. But, okay, and one more thing I would like to say. I'm a Black American here in Shreveport. We do a lot of community activist work here. But I would like to say to a lot of your listeners who actually share my ethnicity, is that a lot of us are confused about this immigration. We want to say that these people deserve a better chance of life, but I would like to tell my people that when you stop and think about it, who has to give the housing and the jobs up for these people when they come? And it's not only just us now. When you look at it, there's white Americans. Pretty much we have been, as Black Americans, we are already at the back of the line. So how can we continue to allow other people to come over and get breaks where they rule? They're owning all the stores in our neighborhood. And I just, want to, use your show as a format to tell my people to wake up to what's going on.
Well, if the United States had a surplus of wealth, a surplus of food, a surplus of room, and a surplus of buildings, I could see allowing people to come on in. That was certainly the case during the heyday of immigration to the United States and the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. But we don't have that situation anymore. We don't have jobs for 100 million legal American citizens who would like to have a job. And so bringing more people into this country, whether it's refugees from the Middle East or Mexicans and Central Americans coming across that border, it is sheer, utter nonsense. There's no work for them. There is strain on social programs. There is strain on infrastructure. California is dealing with a record drought, and it is exacerbated by having millions of people who do not legally belong in this country out there in California, drinking water, cooking, showering, watering their lawns, washing their cars. And it's just utter stupidity, and it's only being done, first of all, because they're all going to wind up being Democratic voters next year. And second, there is this agenda to destroy our sense of a cultural, regional, national, historical identity and blur us all together so they can drop the borders. That's the same agenda behind, trying to get rid of the Confederate flags. And, somebody wrote in and said, if Walmart's got this, costume of an IDF soldier, do they have one of the Confederate general? Because that's what I want to be on Halloween. No, they're not going to have that. They're trying to erase our sense of identity and history so that we're just this common clump of workers to support the ruling class.
I'll say this, and I'll go ahead and just continue to listen to the show. But what I'm seeing is with the attempt to take down all the monuments, the Confederate memorials and monuments, the flags, and then with this brainwashing that's going on in the public school system where they're talking, actually downplaying slavery, I believe what's going to happen within 25, 30 years, you're going to have a generation of people in this nation who never knew slavery existed. And if they do, it's just going to be some whitewashed piece of history. Because I think what we're actually witnessing is the rewriting of history right before our eyes.
Yeah.
And once again, I want to say that I thank you a lot because you have been used to open up my eyes a lot. I listen to your show every day, man, and hopefully one day I can get you to help on my show so that you can open up a lot of people's eyes. I'm not going to advertise on your show, but get with me because you have a wealth of information that a lot of people in the South especially needs to hear, my friend.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and I look forward to it. Unfortunately, we're out of time this segment. I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be back with 2 more phone calls after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's get some phone calls out of the way. Dean in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you very much for taking my call. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Yes?
I wanted to ask, I was told that there was a vote in Congress today regarding President Obama's desire to put boots on the ground in Iraq, and I was curious if you were familiar with that or if you'd heard anything about that vote today.
Well, I haven't heard anything about it. I think Obama is relying on the previous authorization for the use of force going all the way back to 2003. And so I'm not sure what they're voting on. And in any event, Obama as president does have 30 days where he can send troops wherever he wants under the War Powers Act.
Okay. Wonderful. More.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, and keep up the good work. We do appreciate it out here.
Well, thank you very much here. And our government is pushing for a world war because they can't think of anything else to do to cling to power and wealth and control. All right, we're going to go to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, this war that's in Syria and these people that are fleeing from their country because of its destruction, because of other people coming in and destroying us. I'm meaning us. They had, back in the 90s, before they started all this, it was one of the most beautiful countries. I had heard many people talk about it as just a city, the country to go see. The people were nice, they were wonderful, and just like any place where they're dropping bombs and killing your neighbors, and you're trying to flee from the insanity. You don't want to leave your country. You don't want to leave your home, which I'm surprised the Palestinians, of course, they're blocked in now with giant walls, but, you know, people will flee from devastation and all the bombs and chaos and try and protect the children and just try to get away from that. I think those people, if given the chance, would want and desire to go back if everybody would just get out of their country and they could go back.
It's already happening. Ever since Russia came in to Syria, the refugee flow from Syria has reversed, and something like 800,000 Syrians who fled the country have now gone back to rebuild their homes and their lives.
And most of you, if when you see Mexicans that are coming across the border to America, I think when you've been to Mexico, I don't know that you have, but it's a beautiful country, and I don't believe any of those people would ever want to leave their country if they could find decent jobs there.
Well, in the case of the illegal immigrants coming across the border, Mexico and the other governments are taking advantage of the situation to empty their prisons. They're literally taking their criminal class, sending them across the border, and say, have fun. If you ever come back into the country, you'll go back into jail. Or they're people who have committed crimes and they're fleeing law enforcement. And that's why we're getting these dregs. Because, yes, I've been to Mexico many times. Many parts of it are beautiful, some not quite so much. Guadalajara's kind of depressed. Yes, they've got employment problems down there. Yes, they've got drug corruption, which is being fanned up by assistance from the United States of America. But when you have a mass migration across a border, it acts as a filter. And the people who are successful and prosperous and skilled and capable in their own country, they're not going to be making that trip. These are people who cannot make it in their own country, or they're fleeing prosecution for crimes, criminal activity. We've had a lot of these people coming across the border carrying drugs. Again, and Castro did the same thing when the U.S. opened up immigration from Cuba. He just went down, he emptied all the prisons, put them on boats, and said 90 miles that way. Good luck. Okay?
Yeah, whenever they're talking about all these people, I just think the majority, most everybody would want to be in their own country if everybody would just leave them alone and they could have their country back.
Well, what we're hearing from Europe is that all these people making this very long walk from the Mideast up to Europe have been told they're going to get all kinds of free stuff. And it's created a huge problem. We're going to be talking about that a little bit longer, where these people are arriving with serious medical problems. They're going to the hospitals, and when they're told that they have to pay for their own medication, they're like screaming and saying, no, this is nonsense. We were told we were going to get houses and cars and free cell phones and all this other stuff. And a lot of the illegals coming across the border from Mexico are reporting the same thing. They're being told that once they get here, they'll get tons and tons of government free stuff. And they're very angry when they find out that this was a promise that is not going to be kept.
Well, that's one of those stories where it sounds too good to be true. It usually isn't, but all right. Well, I just had to throw those 2 cents in.
All right.
I wouldn't.
Okay, I wouldn't
want to leave my home. Thank you. Bye.
All right, got to let you go. We're going to fit in John in Barbados before the next commercial break. What's on your mind, John?
Gitmo, Michael.
Yes.
Now, there's a guy there. He's been there for 14 years. His name is Shaker Amar. He is a British resident. He is a Saudi citizen that married a Brit and has been living in Britain until his arrest in, actually, somebody got paid $50 to hand him over to the American military. And he's been in Gitmo for 14 years. 2007, he was cleared for release.
Yes.
And Congress is supposed to look at this release within 30 days and say yay or nay. Now that was that was 8 years ago. I mean, obviously he's been tortured for 14 years, and I think that's why they're very reluctant to release him.
You are exactly right. You are exactly right. There was a gentleman named Binyam Mohammed who managed to get released by the United States, and he was not shy. He started showing reporters the scars on his body that indicate the U.S. government was using far worse things than waterboarding to get useful confessions out of people who had done no wrong. I mean, the military tribunal has already said 1/3 of the people being held at Guantanamo have not done anything wrong to the United States and should be released, but they're not being released because their bodies bear the marks of what was done to them to get them to confess to crimes. And the U.S. does not want them going on out and being interviewed by reporters. And so the U.S. is going to keep these people in there until they die.
Well, apparently, Obama as well has cleared this guy for release. And to prevent the release, because they said they were going to release him a month ago.
Yes.
He should have been released on the 26th, yesterday. But apparently 2 senators went down there on a fact-finding tour and delayed the release. Now they're going to give the Congress another 30 days to debate this thing. And I'm sure nothing will happen. The poor guy is still being tortured and rotting in that prison.
I don't think they're torturing him now, but I think the reason they're keeping him locked up is that they did torture him in the past, and they left permanent marks on his body. And that's the only thing that makes sense. If this guy is innocent of any wrongdoing, and everybody knows it, and he's been cleared for release, why not release him? Obviously, there's something about the person himself that is a major embarrassment to the U.S. government.
Well, I dispute that. He still is being tortured. He's being force-fed because he's refusing food. And that is torture. Have you seen how they do it?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we got to take another break for commercials here, John. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And if you're wondering about the loud roaring in the background, the warplanes are out there doing the turn and burn, and for some reason, they were out there making a huge racket at 1 o'clock this morning, waking everybody up. Nobody knows why, but they're out there just having fun with all their taxpayer-provided toys and burning up all that fuel and putting all those greenhouse gases into the air, and so forth and so on. Now then, we just put up a story at WhatReallyHappened.com, and we should pay attention to this. There has been a growing awareness that in the week before the stock market crash in 2008, a lot of members of Congress pulled their money out of the stock market. Ooh, how lucky for them. And it's obviously something that is very, very suspicious. How did they know? Who was telling them? And over at the Free Thought Project, they've got an article basically saying that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department saw the crash coming, didn't tell you, the ordinary American investor, but did tell their buds in the U.S. government. And they cite some specific examples of senators who dumped their stock before the drop, and other officials who went on a short-selling binge and made a huge amount of money. Now, this article goes on to say that these actions would be illegal for any American in any of the circumstances, but members of Congress and high-ranking government officials are actually exempt from insider trading laws. This is an error. In point of fact, the insider trading laws apply to everybody, including the U.S. Congress and members of the government. It's never enforced. It's one of the perks of the job that you get to break that law and nothing bad will ever happen to you. There was actually an attempt, I think it was last year, to pass a law specifically addressing the issue of congressional insider trading based on what they were learning on their jobs, because it's rampant. It's epidemic. And not too surprisingly, of course, that bill was voted down. But the existing insider trading laws do, in fact, apply to members of Congress. They are just never, ever enforced. It's good to be the rulers, so forth and so on. Now, we have been talking about this demonstration that Russia has put on over Syria, showing the efficiency of their weapons. And the U.S. is trying to protect their own military-industrial complex with all these stories about, the cruise missiles are falling in Iran, the planes are rusting on the ground in Syria, none of which is substantiated, of course. But the world is beginning to understand that the American system of weapons development is all about the money and not about the weapons, standing in sharp contrast to other countries like Russia and China, where they get more bang for their buck because the goal is a working weapons system. And we've talked about the embarrassment of the Donald Cook. We're talking about how the Theodore Roosevelt was embarrassed by a single French submarine. And now there's a very alarming story coming out of Sputnik News saying that the AK-47 continues to prove itself a superior weapon to the M16 or its descendants, which are in the hands of the American military. Now, Russia has a philosophy about all the military equipment they develop. They know the real world is dirty. They know that there's dust and grit, and they design their weapons to deal with it. Their aircraft are all rough field capable, and they actually have upward-facing air intakes so the planes can take off and land without worrying about debris on the runway. Whereas American planes, you have to go out and just make sure that there's nothing on the runway before you can deploy them. So there's this article basically saying anyone with an AK-47 can overmatch U.S. soldier in firefight. And we're looking at this string of boondoggles, which we are supposed to believe makes the United States unbeatably superior in the military. Tank, air, and naval warfare. And then we have the F-22, the F-35, Independence-class ships, the Donald Cook embarrassment. It suggests strongly that much of U.S. military might is actually a costly illusion. So, now here's an interesting story. This came out of Pravda. Despite the Russian sanctions, U.S. defense companies are continuing to purchase Russian helicopters, the Mi-8 and Mi-17. And it's kind of an embarrassment that the U.S. government is ignoring their own sanctions while they scream everybody else has to punish Russia. And it's also an admission that Russia does build better helicopters than American companies. It's a bit of an embarrassment. Meanwhile, over in Afghanistan, the sanctions have actually impacted the U.S. forces on the ground who are using Russian-built helicopters, and because of the sanctions, they can't get spare parts for them anymore. It's a little bit of a mess over there. So let's talk about the immigration crisis. It is impacting all of Europe. There's a video on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com about Islamic jihadists blocking the streets of Copenhagen. They're basically rioting. We want more of whatever it is that we want. And far from this gradual integration of all cultures into this common mob of workers, we're seeing an increase in factionalism, nationalism, outright hostility. Over in many countries in Europe, people are responding to the sudden surge in crime and violent attacks and rape by going for those gun stores. So gun sales are booming, not just in the United States of America, but all across Europe where they're allowed to have guns. Not all the European Union nations allow their people to have guns. Just sit at home and wait for the refugees to come in and steal your television set. Meanwhile, they're trying to recover from the embarrassment that the U.S. was actually supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra and all these other so-called Islamic terror groups by refanning the flames of the fear of Islamic operatives inside the United States of America. The FBI says there's a terrifying number of Islamic operatives inside the United States of America. They're getting ready to do bad things. Well, if the FBI is telling us the truth, and I have no reason to think that they are, but if they are telling us the truth, this tells us all that the NSA, the CIA, ICE, and the FBI are complete and utter failures. Maybe we should shut them down, save a few bucks. That's how they could balance the budget. We know that the FBI's prowess against terrorists involves setting up patsies using informants. Last April, they arrested a guy, John Booker, for allegedly planning to carry out a suicide bombing at a military base in Kansas on behalf of ISIS. And it turns out that undercover FBI operatives had been manipulating this 20-year-old for 6 months, providing him with bomb-making materials, and even building a bomb for him. It was a fake one. Now, my first question is, I'm wondering if this Booker was on prescription antidepressants, because people on those medications have poor impulse control. They're easy to manipulate. And because 1/4 of the American population are on these medications, I'm sure that these FBI plotters are going to be aiming for people on these medications because they can talk them into doing anything. Meanwhile, latest WikiLeaks confirmation, the CIA is conducting operations on U.S. soil. It's illegal by law. The CIA is specifically prohibited from collecting intelligence concerning the domestic activities of U.S. citizens. But they're above the law. The law, that's just for you little people. It's for you workers, for you serfs, for you slaves. The laws are for you, not for us. We have the rings of power. We are above the law. Remember not too long ago where the government published a list of 72 types of Americans considered potential terrorists by official U.S. government documents. Conservatives, libertarians, Christian gun owners, opposed to abortion, globalism, opposed to illegal immigration. If you believe conspiracy theories, you are a potential terrorist. Guilty as charged. Got to take a break for the news and commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. Tom is still in the control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, in the last segment, we mentioned that the surge of refugees pouring into Europe has resulted in a surge of gun sales in those member states of the European Union where personal firearm ownership is allowed. And going one step further, there's a mayor of a town in Italy that is offering to pay 1/3 the price of a small firearm purchase to all the residents. They're going to help the people of their town buy guns. Remember Kennesaw, Georgia? The gun grabbers never like to talk about that. Kennesaw, Georgia, a while back, passed a law requiring every home to have a firearm. Crime dropped 89%. You're not supposed to know that. You're supposed to think guns are bad. Guns are bad. More about guns in a little bit here. Okay. Another unpleasant incident from the boys in blue. This was reported over at filmingcops.com, which is a website that collects all of this stuff together. And the story here is that basically this family was just asleep at home, and all of a sudden the cops kicked down the door, grabbed them all, caused physical property damage, handcuffed them, put them in the patrol cars for 45 minutes. Then they let them go. And the only reason the cops had done the SWAT team treatment on the house is there was a stolen car that had been abandoned nearby. And the cops just assumed that a car thief is going to leave the car he stole in front of the house he lives at. It makes perfect sense, right? If your brain is melted on prescription antidepressants, as many cops are. So they kicked down the door and they harassed this family. Meanwhile, of course, wasting all this time on a completely innocent family, the real car thief has gotten away. Another very unhappy story. This is being reported in Oraz.com. Police officer was responding to a domestic disturbance call, driving 30 miles above the speed limit, but without his lights and siren on, and he struck and killed a pedestrian. And he's being charged with a misdemeanor. Interesting. We've all heard about Common Core and what an absolute disaster it is, and how they're deliberately teaching our kids very convoluted ways to solve problems that actually make it harder. And there is an example from Blacklisted News. We have it on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And it is a math test paper which says solve 3 times 5 using the repetitive addition method. And the student wrote 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15. And the teacher marked it wrong, saying it should have been 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 15. Now, when I was a kid, you memorized your multiplication tables. So that you'd look at the problem, I know what the answer is. Very quick, very efficient. Common Core is literally handicapping the brains of our children by making them use these very convoluted methods to solve problems that actually make it harder, not easier. Now, we're getting word that the Arizona Board of Education has voted 6-2 to reject Common Core. Caught a lot of people off surprise, but they want their kids to grow up with an education, not an indoctrination, which is what Common Core is all about. Now, here's an amazing amount of silliness. We've talked about George Orwell. We've talked about his book 1984 as a warning against tyrannical society. Unfortunately, our governments are using it as the dummy's guide to tyranny. The estate of George Orwell is sending copyright takedown notices to anybody using the number 1984. And it's, talk about Orwellian. I mean, the irony is just stunning here. Now, you need to remember something. One, under copyright law, you can't copyright a number. Two, you can't copyright the name of a book. What's the Orwell estate going to do? Go and charge residuals from every history textbook that mentions anything that happened in the year 1984? It's absurd. I don't think George Orwell himself would have approved of this kind of nonsense. Meanwhile, up in Germany, they have discovered more spying software. In Angela Merkel's office, a laptop on one of her aides, senior official, found this spyware called Regin, which is thought to be used by both GCHQ and the NSA. And Germany's not happy about that at all. Nobody's happy being spied on. So, now recently there was a break-in over at TalkTalk where a lot of personal information was revealed. And they were criticized because they were storing all this information, customer bank details, in clear text. They didn't encrypt. TalkTalk's defense of that is saying there actually is no law that says we have to encrypt customer bank information. That's absurd. I don't care if there's a law or not. If you are accepting that kind of critical information in an age where break-ins of computers are a daily occurrence, you encrypt it. It's not that difficult to write powerful encryption, especially if you're the only one using it. It's amazing what lawyers will think. By the way, the Department of Justice is now trying to get around privacy issues on computers by taking the position that because you don't actually own the software on your computer, you are merely licensing it, it is still the property of the software company, and therefore, once you type it into the computer, it's in the public space and you have no expectation of privacy. That's their latest angle, that they can go in and get the computer companies to turn over all your private personal information. Good reason to have an air-gapped computer. I would argue the counterposition. The post office is a private company, but when you hand them a letter with your information, that envelope is your right to privacy. It still takes a warrant for the government to open your postal mail and read it. The fact that it is now in the possession of a company doesn't make it any less private. The European Union Parliament has rejected amendments protecting net neutrality. They're selling out to the main content providers here. And finally, there's an interesting little article. This is from Technology Review out of MIT, saying that you've been misled about what makes a good secure password, because there's been a study of state-of-the-art password guessing techniques that found requiring numbers and uppercase characters doesn't really make them any stronger. Simply making the password longer and including symbols was much more effective at protecting a password from being guessed at by the latest hacker tools. A judge has thrown Wikimedia's NSA lawsuit out. The judge simply ruled that evidence of NSA spying was inadmissible, therefore Wikimedia couldn't prove the NSA was spying. It's another bogus decision like that one down in Florida that threw out Larry Klayman's RICO lawsuit. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And because of the work of people like Richard Gage and accelerated along by Netanyahu's blatant display of mendacity, linking the Palestinians to the Holocaust, more and more people are turning to look back on 9/11 and actually look at the facts. They're realizing there was a third building that came down despite being hit by an aircraft. And so the U.S. government, in a Hail Mary pass to try and head this off, has dredged up an old trick from the Soviet Union, which is to declare that anybody who doubts anything the government says is mentally ill. And we posted a link to this huge steaming pile of Becks that came out of the Journal for the Frontiers in Psychiatry. And the article is, What About Building 7? A social psychological study of online discussion of 9/11 conspiracy theories. And it's several pages of why these people just have to be mentally ill to come up with all of this absurd stuff. And I sent an email to the authors, which remains unanswered at this time, saying, okay, please explain as a function of mental illness the fact that Fox News, CNN, and BBC reported on the collapse of Building 7 26 minutes before it happened. How does that fit in with your theory that this is all mental derangement affecting the majority of the American people? Now, over the weekend, there was a tragedy at the Oklahoma State Homecoming Parade, and this 25-year-old woman rammed her car into a crowd of people at high speed, killed 4 people, injured a whole bunch. Now I'm wondering, where are the calls for banning cars for all safe, law-abiding drivers because of this one individual? Where are the calls for background checks before being sold a car or a gallon of gasoline? Where are the calls to limit cars to only having 10 gallons of gas? Where are the calls for registering all purchases of gas and oil? Because under the logic of the gun grabbers, that's what should be happening right now. Every time some nut job whose brain has been melted on prescription antidepressants kills someone, the first thing we hear is take all the guns, limit magazines, background checks for ammunition. Why in the area of guns are the innocent punished for the crimes of the guilty? That's what I want to know. And of course, I'll get lots of hate email from the gun grabbers saying, well, cars serve a useful purpose and that way we have to go that way. Guns serve a useful purpose. They put food on the table, chase varmints out of your farm fields, chase criminals out of your home, and they're a lot of fun to put holes in paper with, and I've done all 4 during my lifetime. Now, there's another article out here in Counterpunch that's attempting to keep the focus on the guns, the great mental illness hoax, rampage killing, and the gun culture. And this whole article is saying, pay no attention to all these people talking about mental illness or prescription antidepressants. The problem is the guns. The problem, always the guns. We've got to ban the guns. They're really getting into a panic situation. But, as we mentioned yesterday, guns have been around for a very long time. And so have the mentally ill. The surge in mass shootings coincides with the flooding of the American people with prescription antidepressants. Right now, 1 out of every 4 Americans are on some form of these medications. Most of them don't really need them. It's just a big moneymaker. And along with mass shootings, which are newsworthy, there are other forms of less newsworthy violence, such as road rage, bar fights, domestic violence, police brutality, and suicide have also increased right alongside the mass sales of these drugs to Americans. Now, the good news is, according to a new poll by Washington Post ABC, most Americans say the problem is mental health, not the guns. Obama's already out there saying, no, the gun laws lead to safety. No, they don't. The only gun law that ever led to safety was the one in Kennesaw, Georgia, where they said, you will have a gun in your house. And the criminals said, well, we're going to go someplace else, I think. But the gun laws, the gun grabbers, they want to punish innocent, law-abiding citizens for the crimes of a few deranged people. And it doesn't really make any sense. It really doesn't make any... What it is they're afraid. They know the American people have been pushed to the edge. As long as we have our guns, there's a line the government will not dare cross. Once they get the guns, all bets are off. They'll take your silver, they'll take your gold. For the banks, they'll take your children for more wars of conquest. Thomas Jefferson wrote, the reason for the Second Amendment is to give the government a reason to leave the people alone. The Second Amendment isn't about sport shooting, target shooting, hunting. It's about preserving the security of the free, independent states from a tyrannical central government. Now then, yesterday, the World Health Organization came out with this very bizarre report saying that red meat, processed meat, is as dangerous as cigarettes. And immediately they're being seriously criticized for this, certainly from the meat producers. For one thing, they don't differentiate between eating healthy, naturally raised red meat versus meat that has gone through processing and has chemicals added to it, like synthetic bovine growth hormone. The link to cancer for that was at the core of this whole Fox News synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit, that Monsanto wanted the reporters fired, and Monsanto got its way. But there's an article over in zoharcom.com saying that the methodology behind this World Health Organization report is to simply take records of patients, look at their diet, and then look at the illnesses they come down with and say, oh, this must have been the reason. And it's very poor science. Nobody's actually gone out and done a study of what a person is eating, what illnesses they get. It's all inferred from notoriously unreliable hospital admitting statements. In some cases, people were being asked, what did you eat over the last year? Do you remember what you ate last week? At the very best, this is sloppy science. At worst, this is another political agenda wrapped in a cheap white laboratory coat and held up for you to believe as you are told to believe. Got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I just put an article up at WhatReallyHappened.com. And it's basically talking about a statement made by the FBI at the Cybersecurity Summit in Boston, that if you are infected by ransomware, you should just go ahead and pay the ransom. Yes, we've got your back, but to be honest, can't do a thing about it. This is the FBI admitting that they and the CIA and the NSA cannot, in fact, actually find real criminals or terrorists on the Internet. The FBI has just admitted the sole purpose of the National Security Agency's monitoring of the Internet is to keep watch on law-abiding citizens, to steal their business secrets, to steal copies of pictures of their naked lovers so they can whack off and pretend that they've got a real life, and scare you into silence, although obviously that part isn't working very well. But the FBI is now out there admitting, if you get infected with one of these ransomwares, you might as well just go ahead and pay it. There's not a thing they can do about it. Not quite the image of the FBI that we see in movies and TV shows, is it? My goodness. Alrighty, now then. Obama's science czar is sounding the warning that global warming is now endangering shrimp, lobsters, and crabs. Actually, I think they're in much more trouble from cocktail sauce, but that's just me. I got a huge list. I'm going to have to add this to it. All the things that have been blamed on global warming. Complete nonsensical, but they're out there sounding the warning because next month, as you know, there's a big climate summit in Paris, and all of the carbonazis are over there with their private jets and their limousines belching out greenhouse gases to scream that we all have to pay taxes on carbon. Al Gore is out there celebrating. He has been building himself a little youth cult to brainwash them into saying, you are the fighters for planet Earth and pay no attention to the actual science. We know we're right and we are winning. You are the mini-Gores. And it is. It's amazing. Again, when they get over to Paris, I hope they get hit with a blizzard. There's a good chance they will. All around the Northern Hemisphere, snow is arriving early. Cold is arriving early. By the time of that Paris summit, they could be under some serious, heavy snow. Serve them right. Of course, they're already out there trying to insist global warming leads to cold winters. Really? How could you possibly question the opinion of this well-paid man in this white laboratory coat? Anyway. Now, just to tell you how completely bogus all of this environmentalism for profit has gone. And let me be specific here. I like nature, and I support the wise use of resources. Claire and I recycle LED bulbs, okay? But too much of what is sold to you as concern for the environment is just another sales pitch for a overpriced, underperforming product. Now, over in Germany, they've got a town, Gescher, that decided they were going to install 9 solar-powered streetlights for 28,000 euros. Just set them up along a stretch of a walkway in a park. There's only one problem. When the sun goes down, the solar street lamps stop working because apparently the battery in it can't store up enough of a charge to run the street lamp for more than a few minutes. Good thinking. Good. You would have thought they would have gotten one of these things and set it up and tested it first. But no, it's green, it's environmentally friendly, we're showing that we support the environment. And now they have a dark stretch of walkway suitable for muggings and rapes, all at taxpayer expense. Now then, article coming out of VAC Truth talking about how more and more doctors are starting to come forward and say this whole concept of shaken baby syndrome is nonsense. There is no such thing. It was a cover to come up with for vaccine-damaged babies. They'd shoot the babies full of vaccines. The baby would suffer permanent injury or die. Oh, no, we can't ever say it has anything to do with the vaccine. It's shaken baby syndrome. It's another made-up disease like hyperactivity disorder. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The guy who came up with that term admitted on his deathbed, we just made it up. It's fictional to sell product with. But more and more doctors are saying that a horrendous crime has been committed by taking parents, killing their babies with these vaccines, and then, to cover up that crime, sending the parents to prison for murdering their own child. So, as I mentioned before, Sesame Street has rolled out an autistic Muppet to normalize vaccine-injured children. What they're going to be teaching the children of America is that it's normal to have a whole bunch of autistic people around. That's it. Get used to the fact that there's autism. It's always going to be there. Nothing can be done to stop it. Yeah, we can, but it would cost the vaccine company. That's what they're doing. They're telling the kids, yeah, there's a lot of autistic children. It's normal. It's normal for there to be huge numbers of autistic children in the population. No, it isn't. Before all this vaccine madness, autism was very, very rare indeed. The Amish, who are still able to avoid mandatory vaccinations under religious exceptions, don't have autism. The vaccinators found one Amish child who had autism, and they held him up saying, see, the Amish aren't immune. Here's an Amish kid who's autistic. And then it came out that the Amish parents had adopted this kid who had been given the mandatory vaccines before moving in with them. It's amazing. All right. We're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. Squid in British Columbia. Aloha. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? It's just funny how it seems like these people don't even have a computer who put out all the non-facts out there, like the vaccines. All the facts are there for showing how bad it is, but yet they just keep going on with their same plan.
All they care about is the money. All they care about is the money. Modern American pharmaceutical companies are no different than the traveling Wild West medicine show salesmen of the 1800s. They're out there to just sell the bottles and make as much money as they can. Don't care if it does any good. Don't even care if it hurts anybody, because they're going to have their wagon across the county line by the time anybody gets sick. It's a completely immoral operation. And again, in service to the profitability of what we're doing, they apparently have been sending innocent parents to prison, claiming that they murdered their own kid. That is sick. That is pathological.
Yeah, it just seems like it doesn't stop either. You know what I mean? It's worse and worse.
Everybody is so desperate for money to make their debt payments to the slave masters in the private central banks. All of the considerations are subordinate to that. This private central bank system, this money junkyism, has destroyed what used to be the best parts of the American character. Our creativity, our industriousness, our altruism, our humanity, all of those are being erased. We're all being turned into little mini money junkies. And it doesn't look very good. Squid, we got to take a break here. Thank you for the call. I'm going to let you go, and we are going to shut off the phone lines for the remainder of the show, as we normally do. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of our show today on this Tuesday here. Another story coming on out. This is from CBC up in Canada. And up in Ontario, public health physician Dr. Richard Shabazz, who used to be pro-vaccine, says it's time for a rethink. Because he says flu has been marketed as this great public health monster of our time. And the risk from it totally overblown. And we've sold influenza vaccines into the great savior of our age. And he says neither one lives up to the billing. Remember when pigs fly flu 2009, it was going to devastate the planet here, and it turned out to be milder than the normal seasonal flu. And the Tamiflu sold for it was no more effective against that flu than acetaminophen. It's all money, money. And a lot of medical professionals are starting to say, this has gone way overboard. So let's talk about GMO right now, because there's a very alarming report that's come on out about the so-called golden rice This is the wonder plant. It grows huge crops. It's going to, halt starvation around the world if everybody plants it. And it's already been known for quite some time. This GMO golden rice is deficient in many of the nutrients you get from natural rice. Your body can't metabolize the rice grains because of the protein expression from the altered DNA. Your body can't use a protein it doesn't recognize. And even more dangerous, if the proteins are close but not matching, your body will try and metabolize it, and that can lead to serious, serious complications. And backing that up, this latest report is saying there does seem to be a link between eating the GMO golden rice and birth defects in the women who eat it. All of this technology is being so recklessly deployed with no concern not just for current life, but future life. They're playing with the code of our biology. The potential to make a mistake that could trigger an extinction-level event is very real. It may have already happened with the epicite gene. That's the gene that has been put in corn. It was developed under a grant by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's now owned by Monsanto. And humans who eat this corn are unable to reproduce because the corn produces antibodies to human sperm. It treats sperm as if it's an infection and kills it. And if that gene breaks into the wild, as so many others have, it's an extinction-level event. Anybody eating corn anywhere on the planet, unable to reproduce. Now, Wendy's, McDonald's, and Gerber have gone public saying that they are refusing to use the so-called non-browning GMO Arctic apples. The marketplace is beginning to respond to the consumer's rejection of all of these. And no doubt Monsanto is out there still championing the cause of banning GMO labeling. Look, what they don't know won't hurt them. And unfortunately with GMO, yeah, it will. So, now the World Health Organization has come out with another report that has a bearing on survivors around Chernobyl, Fukushima, Hanford nuclear waste despite, WIP, and the burning nuclear waste dumps in St. Louis and Nevada. And it's saying that long-term exposure to radiation, even at low levels, can dramatically increase the risk of dying from cancer. And this has a bearing on all those women who are convinced to go in for a mammogram every single year. Because that's long-term exposure to radiation. It's not even all at that low a level. But like everything else connected with the medical establishment, it's all about selling, 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 selling. Now, do you remember from Vietnam, there was this amazing picture of one of the U.S. atrocities where they napalmed a village, and there was this photo of this little girl. Clothes had been blown off of her by the napalm, hideously burned, and she's running in terror. It became an iconic picture of the era. Today, meaning right now, 2015, all these years after it happened, she's finally getting the laser surgery to deal with the burn scars, and apparently she's been in chronic pain her entire life. And some foundation pulled together the money to say it's time to fix this problem. So good that she got taken care of, but why didn't it happen all the way back when it happened? This little girl was obviously not a combatant. Why was she allowed to spend her entire life scarred and in pain? Now, over at the CDC, they're spending $1 million on a project to reduce what they're calling rigid masculinity. They want to change male gender norms to reduce sexual violence against women. This is more liberal nonsense, based on the theory that if you change the environment, you will change the behavior of human beings. All of this is based on Margaret Mead's coming of age in Samoa, which has been shown to have been a fraud, a hoax. all of us are unique individuals. We are a combination of our life experience and our inherited tendencies. That's what the liberals try and pretend isn't there, that you are born with a blank mind, and we can engineer your mind by engineering the world around you. And despite decades of gender-neutral this and that, little boys are still acting like little boys, and little girls are still acting like little girls. Now, for those of you over in Sri Lanka, you might want to look up the sky November 13, possibly have an umbrella. There is a mystery object re-entering Earth's atmosphere. And apparently it's something that has been tracked in orbit around the moon for quite some time. It's designated WT1109F. It's in a very eccentric orbit that takes it out to twice the Earth-Moon distance. And because of its low mass, it is thought to be a remnant of a space mission. And most people are just jumping to the conclusion it's a remnant of Apollo. They're saying the size is roughly 2 meters long, which makes it too short to be one of the main boosters. Might just be a tumbling pattern from the launch adapter, the Apollo launch adapter, the one that surrounded the lunar module. I have another theory. Long before Apollo, long before Mercury, there was a program the United States ran called Ranger. And Ranger was our first attempt to connect with the moon, and it was simply launching these little satellites with TV cameras in them and fling them out to hit the moon and send back televised pictures of the surface of the moon. 2 of the Rangers, numbers 3 and 5, missed the moon. And they're about the right size. I hope they succeed in recovering some of the debris. Originally they said it was going to come down in the Indian Ocean. Now they're saying it's likely to hit Sri Lanka. I hope they find pieces. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't want any property damage. I'd like them to find it. These could be pieces of those lost Rangers. I think that would be very, very cool. Meanwhile, Hobby Lobby is apparently back in trouble. The federal government is investigating the CEO of Hobby Lobby. Apparently, he's a tremendous collector of biblical artifacts. As you already know from earlier issues, heavily Christian. But apparently, it is now suspected that some of his vast collection of biblical antiquities may have been looted illegally from the Middle East. And that, of course, would be a serious, serious crime. And I know everybody likes to collect antiquities. And there are antiquities that are legitimately out there offered for sale. You don't want to go out and steal them from other people in other cultures. You really don't. It's kind of tacky. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed. Reach out to people around you who want to know what's happening to our country. Be there to teach them. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.